Okay, so as Julie said, I co-founded PD Warrior back in 2012, and my background is a physio. I'm a specialist neurophysio, and I've been working in Parkinson's for about 16 years now. I've had a very varied neurological career, and I used to help people with Parkinson's, but I always used to feel fairly redundant, a bit impotent. There was never a lot that I could really contribute to people with Parkinson's. There was never much that I could really help people with to make significant changes to their lives until I came across evidence that forms the foundation of PD Warrior. And it was essentially a light bulb moment for me and my colleague, because we started looking at all this literature, we started applying it to the people in our clinic, and my goodness, the results were fantastic. They were absolutely amazing. For somebody that had been treating this population for an awfully long time, it was like discovering a whole new method of treatment. And the reason why that had changed so much is we were now looking at neuroplastic training principles. So hands up, who has heard of neuroplasticity? A couple of you in the room. I'm going to talk a lot about neuroplasticity today, so it's best I give you a bit of a layman's description of it. Neuroplasticity is your brain's natural ability to protect and heal itself. So within your brain, you've got neurons. Those neurons connect to other neurons, and the more you stimulate your brain, challenge it, the more those neurons connect to each other, and essentially the more neurons you will create to connect to each other. So you can create really strong networks within your brain depending on the stimulation that you provide it with. Stimulation can come from many different areas. It can come from the environment, it can come from work, it can come from social relationships, cognitive challenges, lots of different ways that you can stimulate your brain. The flip side of neuroplasticity, though, is if you become sedentary, disengaged, apathetic, indifferent, and you're not challenging yourself, neuroplasticity is also very effective at pruning your brain back and reducing those neural connections, okay? So what I would love you to take home from today is you need to consider how you can best challenge yourself and your brain to create stronger networks in a way that will help you in your daily functions. And exercise is one of the best ways that you can do that, and that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit further today. The other things I'm going to talk about is why we need to be starting this intervention, this exercise model, early in your disease course. The earlier you can start, the better the results are going to be. Did you know that on diagnosis of your Parkinson's, which by the way is an arbitrary point in time when you actually go and see your GP neurologist and they give you a diagnosis, at that point in time you would have gone there because of motor symptoms. Probably you've slowed down a bit and you can notice that, or you've got a tremor. There might have been some cognitive changes. That particular point in time is only represented by the fact that most of your dopamine producing cells have already perished. So that's the scary news. The good news is that at the moment, the evidence tells us a very compelling argument to support the fact that the more exercise you do and the right kind of exercise you do, you can slow that destruction of those cells down. Now, no medication can currently do that for you. It's very effective at symptomatic treatment and management, but it will not slow the destruction of those dopamine-producing cells down. That is why exercise is absolutely vital, and my role today is to help you appreciate why you can't afford to underestimate the role of exercise either, okay? And that also highlights the fact that you need to start it early. You might have been diagnosed for some time now and be a bit concerned. It's okay. It's not too late, but the sooner you start, the better. And I'd almost say to some patients, you can't afford to lose a day. Like, this is how important exercise should be in your priority list. The last thing I'm going to talk about is the long-term exercise adherence model. It's not good enough that you just start an exercise program and commit to it for a couple of weeks. That's not going to do it. You need to be thinking about exercise as part of your lifestyle solution to manage your Parkinson's. It needs to be something that you commit to for life. Now, if that scares the pants off you, that's okay, because some people have never done exercise, you've never met an exercise you enjoy doing, it freaks you out, that's okay. It's all about trying to find a physical activity that you enjoy doing and then try and supplement that with some of the concepts that I'm going to talk about today. And I honestly think the best way for you to get into a routine, into good exercise behaviours, is to do a program like PD Warrior. And the reason why is it is tailor-made for people with Parkinson's. It is further tailored to you specifically as an individual, which is absolutely vital. And then the other thing is that it teaches you how to move in everyday life. So every time you roll in bed, every time you get the dishes out of the dishwasher, every time you read the newspaper, you are implementing the concepts that you've learnt in the rehab model from PD Warrior. That is why it is absolutely essential that you conduct a program like this. And at the moment in Australia, there is absolutely nothing else that compares to this program in terms of its comprehensive approach to education, empowerment and exercise, all designed to try and give you a long-term approach to exercise. All right? So as we go through, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to just pop your hand up. And if I speak too fast, also pop your hand up, because I do have a tendency to do that. And if I'm restricted by this desk over here, I'm going to compensate somewhere, and it's likely to be in my voice. Okay. All right, so let's talk about early intervention. So this is a model proposed by Brack, and this is relatively new in the space, in the neuroscience space. This was proposed in 2008, and this basically talks about how Parkinson's is not just isolated to dopaminergic pathways, it is also a whole brain pathology. So if you have a look over here, what you can see here in the very early stages of Parkinson's, before you probably have known, who's got Parkinson's here? Okay, and everyone else, family, support, carers. Okay, great. So for those of you with Parkinson's in the room, before you even probably recognise that you had symptoms, you would have already been having changes within your brain. It starts right down here in the brainstem. Brainstem's responsible for all of your autonomic functions like breathing and sleeping and things like that. As it moves up, you will start to experience difficulties with loss of smell. This can happen 20 years prior to diagnosis, depending on the literature that you read. You can start to have difficulties with temperature regulation. So these things you might not notice. You could probably kind of, push them out of your mind. You're not really considering them. But by the time it moves up into the midbrain and starts to affect the basal ganglia, you would certainly be starting to see some of the motor complications that arise from Parkinson's. Things like poverty of movement, which would be experienced with slow and small movements, the tremor, the stiffness, the rigidity. They're all really common motor symptoms that you'd start to see when there's no longer enough dopamine within the system, okay, because the dopamine producing cells have started to die off, okay, and it kind of does it in essentially a linear fashion, and the more dopamine producing cells you lose, obviously the more dopamine you lose in the system, and that has a knock-on effect with multiple other neurotransmitters within the brain, and that's what ultimately leads to that poverty of movement that you guys would experience. The other thing you'd start to see would be sleep disturbances. So for those of you that don't have Parkinson's in the room, you might have already moved out of the bed because you can't sleep with your partner because they're so active at night. That's a really common thing that I hear from many patients. They no longer sleep together because of this REM behaviour sleep disorder that many people talk about, and they don't have a very restful sleep because of that either. As Parkinson's progresses, it starts to influence pretty much the whole of the brain, except for one small part of the brain at the motor cortex, which is what ultimately drives movement. So that area of your brain is not affected, okay? So if I say I want to move my hand, that pathway, that connection, that is still fully intact. What is not intact is the ability to scale and modulate that movement to be a functional and effective movement. That's why you become slower and smaller with your movements and underscaled essentially, all right? But I guess I just wanted to highlight this because it is a whole brain pathology. It's not just located to dopaminergic pathways, which we originally thought, and it's not there to scare you. It's just to say we can possibly slow some of this destruction down using exercise, okay? So we would like to think the earlier we can start to help you guys, essentially on diagnosis, even before diagnosis would be fantastic, and there's a lot of research going into this sector to try and identify biomarkers so that we don't start seeing you when you've been diagnosed. We see you many, many years before that. But we need to see you as early as possible because this is what's going to happen to your brain over time. Some people will progress very, very slowly. 20, 30 years post-diagnosis, they're still incredibly functional. I see heaps of those people in the clinic. Other people might progress a lot faster. And it will depend on lots of different things, the type of Parkinson's you have, your exercise history. You can't bank exercise. It's never too late to start though. Okay, lots of different things will influence your progression. Okay, and you can't really compare yourself to other people. You can only compare yourself to you now. Okay, and many years ago, I would have thought with a progressive condition we couldn't look to keep you at the same stage. We now know both anecdotally and from the literature, if you start exercising the right way, which is using a lot of the evidence I'll talk about today, you should expect to keep a bit of a plateau and in many cases even improve in the early stages. Now that is a very radical thing to say. It might not sound radical to you guys, but to me as a clinician, it is extremely radical to say that you should expect to see significant improvement in the way you look, move and feel by doing a program like this. And we should look to slow your progression of Parkinson's down by using this model. So that's pretty exciting, right? Because there's no side effects, barring injury and a bit of complaint. Which as physios is physio one-on-one for us. So just to highlight as well the role of sedentary behaviour. Now sedentary behaviour is not just the lack of physical activity. It is literally you sitting on your bum or being prone, lying on the sofa and doing stuff all. Okay, now just think about it now. How much of your day do you consistently spend sitting down doing nothing? You might be on the computer, you might be watching telly, you might be doing other things, but your physical activity level is very, very low. Just have a think about it now. You don't have to tell me, but see if you can put an hourly number on that. How many hours do you spend doing that? Because every hour you spend doing that, you are not protecting your brain. It is neurodegenerative. All right? So the take-home message is you need to start moving a little bit at a time, start building on it, and then start creating really strong exercise behaviours. A little bit every single day is absolutely essential. All right? This is just a diagram that showed, this was a study done in 2013. They looked at people newly diagnosed, how much activity they were doing at that point. And what they found was that at diagnosis, people were already walking 30% less steps than healthy aged matched control, so people that didn't have Parkinson's, at diagnosis. Okay? So that's not causative, but there's a correlation, which tells us that at diagnosis, you're already moving less. Okay, now of course there's going to be outliers and variation within that, but across the board that's what was happening. And when people were moving, they were moving for shorter lengths of time. So they weren't creating high intensity activity either. Okay, so this is all indicating very neurodegenerative behaviour patterns. So again, I go back to put an hour on the amount of time you spend sedentary at the moment. Start thinking about ways that you can reduce that time in sedentary behaviour patterns. Okay. Just over here on this other diagram was another study done by Van Nimwegen, and they were basically looking at initial stages of Parkinson's, so when you're newly diagnosed, you're doing about 200 minutes of activity per day. By about stage 2, which is what we as clinicians would say when you start to experience bilateral presentation of motor dysfunction, you're already moving 13% less. By stage 3, where you're likely to be experiencing postural instability, you're already moving 21% less. These are big numbers, okay? So these are just multiple different studies saying essentially the same thing. Activity levels decline over time. Now, it may be because of loss of confidence. It may be because there's mood changes, cognitive changes. There's lots of reasons why this might happen, but none of those are inevitable. It's up to you to decide whether you're just going to let it happen or whether you're going to take a really strong approach and try and do the best you can at keeping mobile and active. All right? So let's talk about cognitive decline. Who here in the room is concerned about cognitive decline? Anyone? A few people? Everybody? It can be a natural progression of ageing. Certainly the rate and the speed of processing can decline over time. Short-term memory loss can certainly increase with ageing. And what is the biggest risk factor for Parkinson's at the moment for getting Parkinson's? Ageing. We have an ageing population, which means our rates of Parkinson's are also increasing. So you're already, if you're over 65, having to deal with the effects of ageing as well as a neurological condition that is likely to influence your cognition. Okay? And again, lots of people will be affected differently by the cognitive changes, but a lot of people will have cognitive changes very early on in the disease process. Okay, but there are ways that you can influence and improve that, again, by exercise. Okay, now the reason why this is so important, apart from the fact and the obvious statement that you want to be as cognitively intact as possible. That is you. That's what helps you get around and do the things that you want to do and be you, which goes without saying. Most of what we do that we used to think was very automatic has a very strong cognitive component. Your balance has a very strong cognitive componentry. If we try and confound your capacity to balance well by introducing multiple tasks where you have to think, your balance will inevitably decline, okay? Which is a really big problem if you're moving out and about in a shopping centre, you're negotiating people, furniture, shopping trolleys, it's loud, it's noisy, you're negotiating different things, you're thinking about where you've got to go to next, where you park the car. You know, there's a lot of brain RAM. You're using a lot of RAM in your brain if you think in computer terms. That's when your balance is likely to be most affected. Unless we can improve the rate of processing speed in your brain and we can reduce the amount of cognitive impact that the Parkinson's has on you through exercise. So there's always a silver lining to this. There's a lot you can do about this. Okay, any questions while we go through? You're all too scared to ask me anything. Mood changes. Anybody here happy to admit they've experienced mood changes? A couple of people? Yeah.
And partners as well?
Yeah, partners can as well, definitely. It's a big role for partners. You know, there's a big change often in the relationship as a partner. So yeah, I don't think we can just laugh at that because it does need to be acknowledged as well. But if we go back to the original question, if you've experienced mood changes, again, this is part of an aging process, a grieving process, as well as a pathology of the disease. Depression is really prevalent. They reckon at least 50 to 70%, again, depending on which literature you read, of people with Parkinson's will experience one severe episode of depression lasting at least 2 weeks or more. If you ever feel that you are depressed, and you know in your gut when you're depressed, you'll know it, you need to take yourself off and do something about it because it doesn't have to be that way. There are lots of things you can do if you are depressed. The first thing is you have to acknowledge it and ask for help. The second big thing that you might experience with mood changes is anxiety. Anxiety is also really prevalent in this condition, okay? There are also lots of things that you can do for anxiety, and can I just let you know, one of the first things you can do is try and improve your levels of confidence and self-belief, okay? Because we typically see a change in self-stereotypes in people with Parkinson's. You are diagnosed with a condition, it's neurodegenerative, it's progressive, oh my goodness, therefore I can no longer do the things I used to be able to do because of this preconceived stereotype you might have in your brain. And that plays into a lot of different things, including anxiety. And that's what we like to help you with in our program, is to try and help you rebuild your confidence, give you some early and quick wins to actually show you and demonstrate to you, you can actually do so much more than you think you can. You just need somebody to guide you and show you how to do that so that you're not going to hurt yourself, not going to put yourself at risk, and we can pitch it at a level where you will see the success and you will gain that achievement. Having that confidence is essential. I interviewed, I think it was about 82 people back in 2013 coming to our clinic, and they were newly diagnosed, and one of the questions I asked them was, what was the first thing you thought about when you were diagnosed with Parkinson's? And almost across the board, in lots of different ways of saying it, essentially people were saying the same thing. It was their instant loss of control. I've been diagnosed with Parkinson's. It is now suddenly out of my hands. I have a progressive condition. There's nothing I can do about it. That was almost across the board what people said. I don't know if that's how you feel or how you felt with your Parkinson's originally, but what we know now is the more that we can get you to believe in yourself and what you're capable of, and get you to understand that Parkinson's is one small part of you. It is not the defining feature that makes you you. You just have to live with it, and you can probably live with it quite well if you do the right things. Okay, but that's what you have at your disposal, and what you can control is how much you want to be in the driver's seat, opposed to just sitting there taking medication and waiting for the inevitable. Okay? So mood changes, we've talked about depression, we've talked about anxiety. Anything else that you'd experience with mood changes? Apathy. I would hazard a guess that because you're here today, you're probably not somebody that's experiencing apathy or indifference at the moment. You had to get yourself up out of bed, get yourself dressed and reasonably presentable, and get yourself along here. So I would generally suspect that not many of you in the room are apathetic. But if you ever feel indifferent, that's when your family probably need to step in, because you're very unlikely to take yourself off to get help because you don't care. That is the definition of apathy. You're indifferent into your current situation. You're not going to be seeking the help that you require. But for family members and carers in the room, that's where you probably need to help your family out a lot, because they will need your support at this time. And there are things that can be done. Okay? And depression and apathy are distinctly different and mutually exclusive. You can be depressed and still motivated. If you are apathetic, you are not motivated. Okay? And that's the type of person that I really struggle to help. That's not my skill set. I need to send you off to somebody else. And you're not ready to start a program like this, because this is hard work. And you will certainly not be able to achieve the volume of work required if you're not fully invested in your outcomes. All right? So let's talk about neuroprotection, because we've talked about some of the doom and gloom, and I touched on this before. This is the really exciting stuff that we're starting to see in the literature. It is by no means conclusive, but it is definitely a very compelling argument for the role of exercise. This was a study that was completed in 2015. The reason I put it up here is because this was one of the first that was done on humans. The reason why there hasn't been a lot done on humans is there's a lot done on animals, because they can do an intervention and then they can take the animals to autopsy. It's generally frowned upon in humans. So we don't have a lot of that data at the moment. But what we're looking at here is two graphs. This graph over here is let me just orientate. This is the control group, and this is the intensive exercise group. And this is the number of patients still on monotherapy, which was a MAO inhibitor. For some of you, rasagiline, you might be aware of it. They were still only taking monotherapy at the end of the 24-month intervention. And if you see here, 75% of the control group had increased to taking levodopa. Now, levodopa is not a bad thing. It's not a dirty word. But a lot of neurologists still don't prescribe levodopa first up because of the side effects. But there will be a point in time where that is the first and only course of treatment that's going to be effective for you. Okay? But the point being that in the control group who weren't doing intensive exercise, 75% of them were on levodopa by the end of the 24-month period versus 20% of the experimental group at the end of the study. Just highlighting the fact that they didn't require levodopa at that point. And we're talking 24 months after the intervention. Not only were they taking less medication, the levodopa had increased significantly in the control group only over that period of time. So we're talking about levodopa, which historically has increased annually for people taking levodopa, plateauing or declining. Okay, we've had probably 10 clients now in our clinic that have reduced the dosage of levodopa over multiple years. That is unheard of in Parkinson's and extremely exciting. It doesn't mean to say that we want to reduce or take away your medications, because I think there's a really strong role to play for taking medications, but the less you need to take, the better, because as I said, they do, and as I'm sure you're very aware, they come with significant side effects. So you need to take them because that will help you to move as well as you can, and you need to get the best training effect you can, which is why you need to be moving as well as you can. But you don't need to take any more than necessary. So if we can reduce that dosage, even better. And the study also showed that at the end of the 24-month period, on the UPDRS, which is more used in clinical research, but it looks specifically at the impairments of bradykinesia, slowness of movement, tremor, stiffness and rigidity, postural instability, lots of other different impairments. They were significantly better at 24 months than they were when they started. Again, I come back to the fact that if you do a program like this, the way it's prescribed, and you continue some form of physical activity afterwards, you should expect to improve and maintain that for long periods of time. This study is one of the longest in human studies, looking at 24 months. That is really exciting news. Okay? Now, you might ask, what did they actually do in the intervention? Well, they had them as an inpatient. They exercised them for 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, for a month. So that's pretty scary when you think about it, but if you actually look at what they did, they had them doing an hour of exercise a day, an hour of stretching a day, and then an hour of ADL training, which is activities of daily living, how you get dressed and supporting and things like that. So what I'm most interested in is that hour of exercise. And it wasn't very intensive either. Okay, so I reckon, extrapolating from that, we can get you doing 20 to 30 minutes of exercise a day, but you need to do it well. It's not just about turning up. You actually need to be really considered in what you do, and you'll get the same bang for your buck. All right? So let's talk about neuroplasticity, and I just think this is a really nice way of thinking about the role of neuroplasticity, because as I said before, it is a double-edged sword. There's a lot to be gained from stimulating your brain, and that's what's going to give you this lush foliage over here on the left. But become sedentary, disengaged, retire from work, or stop looking after the grandkids or doing the crossword puzzles, or whatever it is that you enjoy. The more you disengage from that, the more likely your brain is going to prune itself, because we're very effective at being efficient. And efficiency either means we strengthen the connections that we need to function better, or we reduce the redundant connections that we have because you're no longer using them. Your brain doesn't know what is good or bad. It is only responding to stimulation or lack of. Okay? So the more you stimulate your brain in the right way for the right challenges, the stronger your brain is going to be and the stronger those connections are going to be. Now, when we talk about connections, those are connections between neurons. It's called synaptogenesis, and it's basically a word that describes little tendrils that connect one neuron to another. How long do you think it takes to create a connection from one neuron to another? Anyone want to guess? Sorry?
30 seconds.
30 seconds? A little bit longer? Sorry? A little bit quicker. It's about 15 minutes. That's about enough activity for your little neuron to be seeking out other neurons that might be doing the same thing. It doesn't take long. 15 minutes will start to create that. But what it won't do is create a strong connection. If you stop doing that, it's very unlikely to create strong carryover, and it might go back to doing whatever it was doing and not connecting. You do that again the next day and the day after that though, and you continue to stimulate in the same way, you're very likely to start creating much stronger connections and more stronger structure within that. And what happens over time is that then you then end up with vascularization to support that new connection, and you can possibly also have new neurons created to further strengthen that network. Okay, so it starts very quickly, but you have to stick at it or you're not going to get the carryover and the physiological changes over time. Okay, so one thing we haven't talked about, well, let's just rephrase, hang on. So neuroactive is what we talk about when we're talking about driving neuroplastic change. We're trying to drive those synaptic connections. We're trying to drive efficiency within the brain. We're trying to do all of that with activity-dependent stimulation. That's what we call neuroactive activity, okay? The flip side of that is what we've talked about, which is neurodegenerative activity, which is when you're very sedentary and reducing your physical activity levels. The other thing to think about is what happens in the middle here, which is your neuropassive activity. So this is where you might already be doing some fairly reasonable activity levels. So you might be taking the dog for a walk. You might go for a stroll around the block. You might be even running. You know, we have a lot of people that come in and they're really fit because they're running marathons or whatever, but they've been doing it for a long time. It is no longer any significant challenge to their brain to go through the motions. This is when we talk about an activity being neuropassive. And this is what most of the rehab to date has been. It has not been significantly challenging enough or intensive enough to be considered neuroactive. And it's the neuroactive activity that is going to change those neural connections. There needs to be a problem-solving approach, there needs to be variation, there needs to be retention, and there needs to be the ability to generalise what you do within a rehab environment and setting into everyday activities in life. Because without that, what's the point? Those are all some of the defining features that will make up neuroactive exercise, and that's what's going to make the difference and be the key. So if you're already doing good exercise, if you're already demonstrating good exercise behaviours, pat yourself on the back, because that's the first thing. A lot of people aren't, okay? So that's great. Now we've just got to look at how we can tweak what you're doing to give you the biggest bang for your buck. Alright, the way we do that is with 7 core principles. So I didn't make these up. These have been in the literature for an awfully long time. In stroke rehab, MS, brain injury, we've been using these 7 core principles for over 20 years. But it's not until very recently, and I'm talking 5 to 10 years, have we started to introduce or look at this in terms of research design, okay? So what I'm going to do is go through all of these now and highlight what you could be doing to start incorporating some of these core principles into the way that you exercise now. So let's talk about specificity. It is so important that your program is tailored specifically to you, your exercise history, your injury profile, your goals, what you're having troubles with. So who here in the room is experiencing slowness of movement? Who here is experiencing anxiety? Who here is experiencing cognitive decline, memory loss, difficulties making decisions? A couple of people. Anyone got tremor? All right, so you're all a bit different. The one thing I can guarantee is that you're all different, which means there should never be a protocol-based approach if we want to get the best outcomes for you. So that's why it's really important that you speak to an experienced clinician who can tailor the program specifically to you. Because without that and just doing a generic program like you might continue to do if you go to the gym or swim or run or whatever, is you're going to miss out on a lot of these aspects, okay? It needs to be really specific to you to help you roll in bed better, get out of that low chair better, write better, do whatever it is you need to do better. It really is important that you need to work on what's specific to you. So for those of you that experience slow, small movements and you're bradykinesic, that's where we need to work on increasing your scale and amplitude of movement, increasing the speed of movement and the accuracy of movement. That's what we would largely be focusing on. If you're experiencing tremor, we need to work more on forced use. So that might be where we use augmented training on a treadmill or an exercise bike. You know, the treadmill waits for no man. You can't start walking, you'll end up wrapped around a cross trainer. So you need to, force yourself to work harder than you would otherwise. If you've got cognitive decline, we would have a different approach. So all of these things need to be taken into account, which is why you really do need an experienced neuroclinician with a passion for Parkinson's to help you tailor your program specifically. This is what we have classified as types of Parkinson's. We're not the only people that have done it either, but it certainly helps for you now to put yourself in a bucket, because thinking about whether you're bradykinesic, tremor dominant, or you're falling or freezing, and that is the thing that bothers you the most, that would instantly help you to start shaping your exercise program in the absence of seeing a health professional. If you're bradykinesic, you need to look at scaling up, increasing your speed and accuracy. If you're tremor dominant, you need to force use. And if you're agility impaired, you need to work specifically on high-level balance challenges and lots of practice. And that's the basic thing, and the more you know about it and the more you know how to tailor your program, the better your therapist can structure your program so that you can do it away from them and at home, and then come in for your updates regularly. This was just a study which came out recently in 2016, and again, really, really lovely design. And they were basically looking at that UPDRS again, which I spoke about before, which shows improvements in clinical motor impairments. And what they did was they had people on exercise bikes and they looked at them off medication. And the higher you score on the UPDRS, the worse you are. And then they looked at people on their medication. And you can see here with this whiskers plot diagram, they were significantly lower on their medication, which is what you would expect. Good, you're on the right medication. And then what they looked at after an intensive dose of forced exercise off medications, they were also lower. And in fact, the standard deviation was also lower than people on their medications alone. This is staggering. Does this not stagger anyone else? This is telling us that you being off your medication but forcing use through exercise, you can be as good or better than just taking your medication alone. It doesn't mean you shouldn't be taking medication. It just is there to highlight how powerful exercise can be. But you have to do it the right way. And left to your own devices, I can guarantee you won't do that. Personal training is not a $500 billion industry for nothing. We all need to have somebody cracking the whip in the right way. Okay? All right, this was another study. This is one of the first studies that really looked at forcing use. This was done in 2009. And this was a pretty mean study, actually. They had a professional cyclist on a tandem bike up the front, and they had the person with Parkinson's up the back. And the person with Parkinson's had to keep up with the professional cyclist up the front. So they had to work pretty hard. On average, it was about 30% more than self-selected pace. And they did that for 8 weeks, 3 times a week. What they found at the end of that study, again using the same UPDRS motor impairment score, they found that rigidity, that stiffness that you might experience, was 41% better than when they started. The tremor was improved by 38%, and the bradykinesia, the slowness of movement, was improved by nearly a third. Now, in talking to a neurosurgeon that does DBS regularly, these are the kind of results you would expect with major neurosurgery and deep brain stimulation. Again, really, really exciting literature. Okay, so this was just done on a forced use exercise bike program.
It's funny, isn't it? 'Cause if this was the pharmaceutical industry producing this result, they'd make it pack it.
Yeah. The thing is, you can't put exercise in a pill, so why would they bother? You know, and it's really hard because we can't do studies on exercise the same way that we can in a controlled way with medication. It's really hard. So often the medical profession don't look at exercise-based studies because there's so many confounding factors. What they don't realise is that we can account for a lot of that now in the study designs that are coming out. So they're very well controlled designs. It does mean that you still need to consider the heterogeneity of the population, but I think you look at all of this and you can certainly see a very compelling trend in the literature. All right, so how often do you need to do it? And I spoke about this before in terms of carryover. If you exercise once, you're going to get some synaptogenesis and you're going to get some neuroplastic change, but you're not going to retain it. To create that long-term improvement, it's something you're going to need to do on a daily basis for the rest of your life, really, because the minute you drop off, so will your brain. Your brain will start pruning because the brain's really good at doing that, okay? So frequency is really important when you consider it, and it needs to be frequent enough that you create that change, but not overwhelming that it just becomes too hard. I've missed a day, I'm just going to throw in the towel, I can't do it. So there needs to be a middle ground where you are going to commit to something. It might even be 3 to 4 times a week. You may not get the same gains as doing it daily, but that might be something that's entirely achievable for you and you can easily digest that. So you need to pick a pathway that's going to suit you for the rest of your life, okay? And when we talk about the rest of your life, that's also incredibly daunting. So it might be, I'm going to do this for the next 10 weeks. I'm going to commit to this, or the next 2 weeks. Whatever works for you, you know, what do they say? How do you eat an elephant? 1 bite at a time. Same thing with approaching exercise, particularly if you're not used to doing exercise. 1 bite at a time. Might be a 2-week stint, might be a 5-week stint, 10-week stint. We actually set it up as a 10-week challenge, and the reason why we do that is we want you to create really strong, effective exercise behaviours. I think you can only do that and make exercise automatic within a 10-week period. Anything less than that and you're really not giving a strong effort, okay? Because you need to be able to get up in the morning, put your shoes on and do your exercise without even thinking about it, because the minute it becomes mentally challenging or you have to think about it and make a decision, that's when things start to slide and that's when choice becomes critical. So the more you can create routine, you just get up and do it. You get up and the trigger is to put your shoes on. Once you've got your shoes on, the trigger is to do your exercise. You are much more likely to do it consistently. Let's talk about power. Now, power is what we talk about in terms of amplitude, speed and accuracy. And the best way to really demonstrate this is I just get you to put your hand up now. Put your hand up, everyone. Good. Now really put your hand up. Could you feel a difference? Hopefully you did. That is the difference that we try and train when we work on increasing amplitude and scale. So how you walk around like this is how you might walk around with bradykinesia. This is how you open the door. This is how you pull your pants on. This is how you brush your teeth, slow and small and underscaled. We want to teach you how to be big, strong and powerful. That takes neuroplastic training principles to embed that and then create an environment where that is an automatic thing for you to do every time you open the door, every time you pull your pants on, every time you read the newspaper without ripping it. All of those things are what we train you to do so that it becomes embedded in the way that you move during the day. If bradykinesia is the main thing that bothers you, that's what we work on, and the specific impairments for you and the injury profile you present with or not. Complexity. All right, I might get you to stand up. Stay near a chair if you have any concerns of balance. It's a really quick demonstration. I can't do it because I've got things in my hands, but what I'd like you to do is stomp your feet, and I want to hear it. Stomp your feet. Stomp. Good. Okay, now rub your tummy and stomp. Keep stomping. Stomp. Rub your tummy. Keep going. Good old pat your head. Add it in, other hand. Keep doing it. 3 things. Pat your head, rub your tummy, stomp. Now, I want you to yell out all the suburbs around where you live and keep stomping, rubbing your tummy and patting your head. And Simon says stop. Take a seat. Well done. Okay, so that's just to highlight how we can layer complexity and challenge. Now, that's completely irrelevant to anything you might need to do in your daily life, unless you do something really weird in your daily life. But what the point is that when you move around in your daily life, you are doing more than one thing at the same time most of the day. You're thinking about what you need to do, you're carrying something and walking, you might be buttoning up your shirt and walking, or, you know, multiple different things at the same time. And what we used to learn at undergraduate level was that you can't have people with Parkinson's doing 2 things at the same time because they're likely to fall over. And it's true at face value, because if you're thinking about stuff, the thing that's going to be compromised first is the motor component, so usually the walking, which is why people will be at risk of falls if they're doing 2 things at once. We now know better, though, that we can actually help you to learn how to do 2 things at once better. So one of the problems with the damage to the basal ganglia is that you actually lose some of the automaticity of movement. So when you normally roll out of bed, you don't think about how you roll out of bed, you just do it. There's a motor program in there, you access it and you just do it without thinking about it terribly much. When you lose that automaticity and that motor programming, you lose access to that motor program, which just makes it harder for you to do that automatically. You then have to start thinking about, right, well, I have to roll over, I have to shift my bottom, I have to swing my legs over. You know, you have to start thinking about it in segments. What we try and do here is show you how to do that by increasing your amplitude, perhaps, or the forced effort, and then we introduce complexity into the task so that it becomes much more relative to how you might need to do it at home with bedclothes on, with no slidey slip sheet, you know, various different scenarios. And that's why layering up complexity is absolutely essential. It's kind of like the concept of overload. I don't know if any of you have done any significant gym training, but we want to overtrain you so that in your daily lives you are very functional and capable of doing more than one thing at the same time. And we do that constantly by creating an environment where you are doing more than one thing at the same time. It might be a different arm and leg activity. It might be 3 things where you're doing arm, leg, and a cognitive task. Okay? What will likely happen if we introduce a second task is the first task will start to decline. But you refocus and that will improve, and over time we can start to trigger cues to focus on one or the other, and then we can start to withdraw those cues because you can do it internally yourself, and then we can possibly add a 3rd task. But the point being, your program always needs to be challenging for you and the level that will give you the biggest gains. So it needs to be set up for success, but not so easy that you can, it's no challenge, there's no error-based learning approach, you're not problem solving and you're not actually retaining anything. So it's that Goldilocks principle. And again, that comes back to where a really experienced clinician can look at you and go, yeah, you can do this. And even if you don't get it the first time, the second time, possibly even the 5th or 6th time, by goodness, by the time you do it on the 10th time, you're going to be waving your arms around in the air. And that mastery gives you huge reward, it gets you coming back, it gets you excited about doing stuff, and it gives you enormous confidence and the control we talked about before. Relevance, really important that you feel invested in doing an exercise program like this, and this is part of my role as a clinician and other people's roles as health professionals. Our job is to facilitate an approach where you can identify what is most important and meaningful to you and why are you doing an exercise program like this. Because as I said before, it's really hard work and you need to do it frequently if you want to achieve the gains and success that other people do. Okay, so unless it's extremely relevant to you at an emotional level, you're probably not going to buy into a program like this and invest the time, energy and sometimes money to do a program like this. And hopefully your clinician is skilled enough to facilitate this process where you can start to identify what is important to you. And let me tell you, as a clinician, and I've treated hundreds and hundreds of people with Parkinson's, lack of insight and denial is a very common trait. Okay, I've constantly got people coming into me that say, oh, I don't know why I should be here. I'm taking Cinemet and I'm absolutely fine, but my neurologist referred me. I have not met one person that I cannot make a significant difference to. So if you're sitting here now thinking, I'm absolutely fine, I don't need a program like this, I'm telling you now you're wrong. You do need a program like this, because this is going to change your life for the better and hopefully slow the progression of your Parkinson's down. Whether you've been diagnosed 2 days or 20 years, there will always be things that you can gain from doing a program like this. And not only you, but your family members will benefit from it as well. And fun. Honestly, fun got left out of physiotherapy an awfully long time ago, and I don't know why or where it happened, but it was very, very boring for a long time to be doing rehab. So what we try and do is create the fun factor, because if it's not fun, we can't expect you to come back either. And if it's not fun, you're not going to be fully invested in it either. There's certainly an element of reward in mastery and achievement, but I don't think that's enough. It also has to be engaging. It needs to motivate and drive you. Again, you know, you go into a gym and there's music pumping. Music creates a lot of energy. So there's lots of different things that we can help you with to create a really fun and engaging environment if you come into the clinic, or ways to do that at home. Because, of course, the volume of work is going to happen when you're not with your clinician. So there needs to be a conscious thought about structuring the fun factor. And it might be you do it with a buddy. You create really challenging and extremely funny dual tasking activities. Lots of different ways that we can help you to create the fun factor. So long-term adherence. You do a program, you achieve success, what now? Well, that's where you might need to take your second bite of the elephant, because it's really important that you stay on the pathway. I have patients constantly that don't believe me. They finish a 10-week challenge, they go off on a holiday, they come back 2 weeks later and they're like, oh my God, I can't believe how bad I've become just by taking 2 weeks off. The take-home message is Parkinson's doesn't go on holidays, so you can't afford to go on holidays either. You need to commit to a program, and it doesn't have to be PD Warrior for the rest of your life. It can be walking with sprints or something, but it needs to be an activity that you enjoy and you're going to be able to do for the rest of your life. And that can change. That activity can change constantly, and it will probably need to change constantly, and your body will change constantly. But you need to think about how you're going to find an exercise that you can do for the rest of your life. And you don't have to do that on your own. Your support network, your family and your clinician can help you to do that as well. All right, so I'm getting beady eyes over here, so I'll wrap up because I know we're...
Just rattle on.
Just rattle on?
Just rattle on.
Don't give me license to rattle on.
I'm not giving you eyes. You just keep going.
All right, so I made the point before, we're not about saying no to medication by any means. I think it is a really, really important part of how you manage your Parkinson's. That will help you to get the best training effect as well. And if you're feeling a bit down, sometimes levodopa can help in improving your mood as well. There are lots of reasons that you need to be taking the optimal dose of medication for you, which means you need to be seeing your neurologist or your GP frequently, probably every 6 months or as otherwise recommended, to make sure that you are on the optimal dosage of medication for you. But I don't think medication alone is enough to give you back control and quality of life. I really do think you need to be in a program that will empower you, will give you the education you need, and will help you to stick to an exercise program for life. I really think the combination of those will give you the best outcomes. It will give you the best ways to move, look and feel, and it will improve you in terms of your quality of life. So I don't think you can have one without the other. But the caveat to that is that you need to think about your exercise like you think about your medication prescription. It's something you take as a daily dose. It's prescribed specifically to you, and it is updated regularly. It's the same thing with exercise. It's not some vague abstract concept. Exercise has a whole body of science behind it. We know a lot more now than we ever did, and that's why, again, you need to be seeing somebody that's extremely passionate and knowledgeable in this area to make sure that you are getting the right prescription for you. Just a quick epidemiological study to really ram home the fact, in case you're still not convinced that exercise is helpful for you. This was a study that was conducted on over 230,000 people. This was a small part of the larger study. But what they looked at here was the fact that if you've exercised a lot in midlife, but not a lot leading up to when they conducted the study, your risk of Parkinson's is relatively high. Point being, you can't bank exercise. Doesn't matter if you're a big rugby player in the middle of your life, it doesn't stop you getting Parkinson's later in life, okay? Nor does, oh sorry, shouldn't have shown that one, nor does not doing a lot of exercise earlier and starting an exercise program later in life. But you've got a better chance if you do that, okay? The best outcome is if you do high exercise in midlife and continue intensive exercise throughout the rest of your life. That's how we were designed as humans, to be running after buffalo or mammoths, hunting and gathering, pulling shrubs and roots and whatnot. We're not designed and built to sit on our backsides all day in a modern Western society, okay? Our body doesn't like it. It's considered neurodegenerative as far as the brain's concerned. So what do we take from this? You need to move. Even if you've not done a lot of exercise in the past, you need to start now, because that is the best chance you have of slowing your Parkinson's down, and it's big epidemiological studies like this that give us a lot of the data and the evidence towards that. Just showing you some satisfaction data about the PD Warrior program, because I really think it's important to know what other people think, because social proof is really important. This was a study that was conducted on, I can't remember now, 62 people. Macquarie Uni came and did it for us. What they found, the satisfaction levels for the program were really high, and if you consider that a lot of people had come never doing exercise in the past, that's really quite important and quite powerful. 98% of the population that did the PD Warrior 10-week challenge thought it was worth their time. I'm still trying to find out who those 2% were, and I want to have words with them. And then I think what's really, really lovely was that 3 months after doing the 10-week challenge, we didn't follow them up beyond that, 94% of people were still doing some form of regular scheduled activity. And in fact, when we surveyed them, their overall scheduled and incidental activity was greater than healthy age-matched controls. Woohoo! That's great, because that's telling us that we're on the right track. We are improving exercise behaviour patterns. Okay, and what they were doing, breaking it down here, was continuing in whatever sport they were doing, swimming, cycling, Pilates, yoga, PD Warrior, walking, lots of different things. Okay, so it can be going back to whatever they were doing or bonding with somebody and continuing on with a new activity, which is even more novel and more challenging for your brain as well. So I think it's really important to know that the feasibility on this program has been conducted. We have now trained over 1,100 people around the world in this program, and we license it in 4 countries. This program has got legs because it's very, very effective. Okay? So in the absence of anything else currently, it's very highly evidence-based. We know it works. You just need to follow the prescription. So what we're looking at here is, I think, the next revolution. We first had the revolution of levodopa, which was introduced in the 1960s. This has basically taken Parkinson's from being a terminal diagnosis to something you will live and manage reasonably well. Okay, there is still a late stage Parkinson's, stage 5, but what we know now is that you're not going to die with it by and large. You're going to live with it. Okay. And I had a patient tell me once, and I've never forgotten it because it was just so insightful. He said to me at the end of the 10-week challenge, you know what, Mel? My mate down the road's got a dodgy hip. The other one's had a triple bypass. My other mate's got no sense of humour. It's just what you have to live with. And I thought, you know what? That is exactly how I would want every patient at the end of 10-week challenge to be thinking about, that Parkinson's is one part of you and what you need to live with. And unfortunately, as we age in a Western society, we all have to deal with some or several comorbidities. This is going to be one of them. Okay? Doesn't make you special, and it doesn't make you immune from getting other comorbidities and cardiovascular problems and metabolic conditions. But the more exercise you do, the less likely you are to get them as well, which is also a really nice side effect. So we talked about levodopa. The next revolution has been the introduction of deep brain stimulation, which is also incredibly effective for some, has significant side effects. It is major neurosurgery and comes with all the complications associated with major neurosurgery. And it is only really appropriate for about 10 to 15% of the Parkinson's population. So it is not a magic bullet by any means. Exercise and neuroplasticity is available to everybody with Parkinson's. It is relatively easy to do. There are no side effects. apart from going gangbusters and burning out or injuring yourself in the first instance, which is why you need an experienced clinician to help you with this. But there is no reason why, apart from apathy, you wouldn't benefit significantly from this in your management of Parkinson's. So what I would urge you strongly to do today is to really consider the amount of exercise you're doing, the type of exercise you're doing, and is there anything that you could be gained from seeing an experienced clinician to help you tailor your program more specifically to you and your needs to improve the quality of life and the way that you manage Parkinson's. So what's next for you?
Can I just ask a couple of questions about the actual program? Because we
Yep.
are about to start on one and we've been involved in a preliminary.
Yep.
It's only 1 day a week.
Yep. Depends on what model it's set up with. I would struggle to think you're going to make major gains doing any program once a week unless it's associated with a home exercise program where you're encouraged to exercise independently on every other day of the week. And that's what, in the research and my own experience, you need to be doing to make significant gains. Once a week is not going to do it for you.
So where can we go to do this?
If you're interested in doing PD Warrior, which is a fantastic question, thank you, you can go down to this website here, pdwarrior.com. You can type in your postcode and it will bring up the most local places to you. You might need to change the radius you're prepared to travel. If you're in a rural and regional areas, we haven't got many out there yet, but a lot along the eastern seaboard. That's probably the first thing. Otherwise, you can email me. That's my email address there. I can't guarantee I'm snappy with my emails, but I will get back to you at some stage.
Pretty good.
Thanks. Are there any other questions?
I'm just asking about, sorry.
No, you go.
You mentioned power and amplitude, and you also mentioned walking after a 10-week challenge.
Yep.
It's what studies have been done in terms of, I'm trying to work out whether you need to power walk or whether you just stroll. Obviously, the exercise of power walk must be doing more good than.
There's quite a lot of studies. So the question was what studies and research has been done on intensity of walking. There's quite a lot. So when they look at studies, they largely control for walking on a treadmill because you can keep it fairly contained. And they look at doing low-level intensity, moderate and high-level intensity. They have looked at what happens in the brain when you're working at different intensities. And in Parkinson's, almost across the board, there's something called the cortically silent period, and it's abnormally short in people with Parkinson's. And that just basically demonstrates that the electrical activity, the polarization within the neurons is affected. And it's abnormal, and it's across the board in Parkinson's. Treadmill walking at intensive levels consistently can restore that back to normal values. So that's when we look specifically at the intensity of the activity. And across the board, the intensity of the activity is essential if you want to create changes in the electrical activity, which is what they call neurorestoration. The other thing that it does is it creates or increases the release of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, which is also considered to be neuroprotective. So that's one of the enzymes in the brain that helps to protect those dopamine-producing cells. You only get that from doing intensive exercise. So forced use and intensity is not the same as amplitude and scale though. So scale is what you would be looking to do if you were slow and small with your movements and were impacted functionally in what you were doing on a daily basis because of being small and slow. Okay, so when you talk about walking around the block, for instance, and I'm speaking really generically here, but if you were walking currently, I would suggest that you do interval training where you might pick a lamppost to a lamppost or a block or something like that, and not only do you increase the intensity and the effort of the walking, you also increase the amplitude of the walking, which is looking at increasing the stride length, the distance you cover in a step, perhaps the height of the step, and the way that you swing your arms. And again, you may not recognise limitations in your walking at the moment. Sometimes you might need somebody to video that for you. And then if you're prepared to look at it, because it can be confronting, you look at it and you go, oh, okay, I can see now what I need to work on. And many people don't do that. And it's a really quick way for you to go, oh, I can see what's not happening here. I need to be thinking of that when I walk next time. The problem with thinking about stuff every time is that it's incredibly mentally draining to have to think about how you need to walk better. It's much better if you can create automaticity of movement and moving well by training and implementing neuroplastic training principles. So that's a long answer to a short question.
So how does yoga, how is it considered exercise in terms of?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I find yoga and Pilates the hardest to bring the concepts of neuroplasticity into, and I think that's probably more because of my personal bias. I don't do a lot of yoga and Pilates, so I don't really understand and appreciate what goes on in a yoga studio, but I think you could certainly look at yoga and consider the aspects of amplitude and scale, and you could certainly look at that and introducing more of those concepts. I think you could be looking at the level of complexity. So if you've got multiple different movements and you're holding movements for a long period of time, you might be adding a cognitive task. There's ways that you could introduce complexity into yoga. So I think you can definitely do it. It's just that you need to be a little bit more creative in how you bring that in. But it's not to say you can't do that. And likewise with dancing, Tai Chi, you know, any activity where there's an element of choreography or complexity, you could scale it up. You can increase the intensity, make it possibly a little bit more specific to you. If it's fun and enjoyable, then you've got the fun factor and the salience. So, you know, with any recreational activity, it's all about trying to be creative and draw in some of those neuroplastic training principles. And it's doing the rehab program first that will give you the skills to be able to do that independently and long term. Yeah.
Can you do a shorter program? Because I'm going overseas for a few months in December. I would really like to do it before I go home. I don't have 10 weeks.
Yeah, look, you can. We don't recommend it because we want you to be able to commit to a full program, but we recognise that it's real life and things happen. So in that instance, what I'd say is start now because you're missing out on time not doing it. And then we've created lots of support resources for people in your scenario and people that don't live local to facilities as well. We've got a DVD, we've got an app, we've got a members area where you can access online exercise videos, there's education webinars, there's lots of content to support you in scenarios like that, but it would need to be a considered approach where you say, right, I'm going to do 5 weeks now, and then I'm going to continue on my holiday, which sucks a little bit, but I wouldn't give it up, and I'm going to continue doing it on a daily basis, 20 minutes a day. And these are the resources I'm going to need to stop that from being a barrier. So it's challenging to do that, but it's doable. It depends on your discipline. And
Do you have it in the UK?
yeah, we do. Yeah, yeah, exactly. So depending on where you're going in the UK, you could tap into the networks over there as well. Yeah.
Now, there's some science about you have to do something so many times repetitively before it becomes a habit. Do you know that? What is the exact science there?
I don't know. I mean, it depends whether you're talking about professional athletes or giving up smoking or whatever.
In this kind of program, how long would you need to do it before it sort of becomes a bit of
You can create a habit in 3 weeks.
In 3 weeks?
You can lose it in a week. So I think to embed it into daily life, you need 10 because it's all about creating those triggers. And you really will only create those, really strong triggers by doing it routinely for a period of time, about 10 weeks. I think anything less than that, and you will not be able to create those strong triggers that do not require mental energy to just do it. It just becomes part of your life.
Similar here then, that it becomes a bit of a habit, a bit of an addiction that you want to do.
Yeah.
So that's
Oh yeah,
you have to do it for 10 weeks. So that's
yeah, and then you need to want to do it beyond the 10 weeks, and that's where we try and help you because it's not necessarily going to be this you want to do for the rest of your life. Lots of people do. We've had people coming for 5 years, 3 times a week because this is what they enjoy doing. Oh, thanks. This is what they enjoy doing, and they know they're going to work really hard doing this. But other people would prefer to go back and walk around the block with sprint training or go back to competitive tennis or whatever it is. It doesn't matter, but you have to enjoy and want to do it because that's what's going to make you work the hardest. So I think we've probably got time for one question. Yep.
What if you have a physical problem with exercise, like a very bad back?
What if you have a physical problem like a bad back?
Yes.
Oh, look, most of the people that come to us, not all, but most of the people have a problem. It's either a shoulder problem, a back problem, dodgy knees, dodgy neck, whatever. That's why you need to see an experienced clinician that can tailor the program specifically to you. Doesn't mean you get out of jail free. You still have to exercise. You just need to modify it so that we don't exacerbate your back problems and we can still get you working hard enough, but in a way that's going to be most appropriate for you. All right, I'm going to wrap it up there because I have not bought you any time at all. So sorry about that. But I just want to say thank you so much for your time today. Check out the website. If you need any more information, please email me. And hopefully we'll see you around because it's a really close-knit community. So you might see me wheeled out again at some stage. All right, thank you.